How about you guys? Just have fun reading that while you're waiting.
Thanks, so.
And I am, just so everyone's aware, I am recording the meeting just to take
Is that
note.
Abby?
Yes, it
Look,
is.
Abby,
Good morning.
Abby, you were brilliant. I just was like, somehow missed that on the
Oh, that's
19th.
okay.
No, it wasn't okay. It was kind of brought me up a little short, given. But there we are, we're here.
Okay, so everyone's here. We're 10 minutes overdue. So I guess we can start. Are we recording now, Abby?
Yes, we're now recording.
So call the meeting to order. I think the first thing we'll do is introduce the task force once again. Yeah. President, except for Abby. So I'm Mike Marcotte. I'm the state representative from Coventry, and I chair House Commerce and Economic Development. I also chair this task force. So
I'm Allison Clarkson, Senator from Windsor County, the majority leader in the Senate. I serve as Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and on government operations. And I am delighted to be joining this special group.
Adam Reynolds, Executive Director of Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation and Chair of the State Workforce Development Board.
Hi, Kendall Smith, Governor Scott's Director of Policy Development and Legislation.
we also have.
And Sarah's on.
Well, that was the task force.
Sarah's on the
Sarah.
task
Oh,
force.
yeah.
Sarah Buxton, State Director of Workforce Development, Department of Labor.
And Abby.
Hi, everyone. Acting Executive Director of the Vermont State Workforce Development Board, Abby Rim.
We also have Commissioner Harrington with us.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm also isolating at the moment.
Oh, no.
Abby and I are not together. We're in separate buildings. So, but happy to be here and to be a resource for the committee. Thank you.
Sorry.
So, it's the way life goes.
Oh,
It's the way life goes at this moment. So, but thank you.
true.
Cameron Wood, Unemployment Insurance Director for the Department of Labor, but also the Department's Policy and Legislative Affairs Director.
And I'm Pat Moulton. I'm the Executive Director of Workforce for the Vermont State Colleges.
And Dustin, you're on as well.
Yep, Dustin Degree, Deputy Commissioner, Vermont Department of Labor.
Great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning, especially everyone that's here in person. It's good to see everybody in person again. So I think everyone received the minutes to the previous meeting. Did anyone note any errors, omissions, changes that need to be made? Okay. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we will now ask Sarah to, along with Commissioner Harrington and Deputy Commissioner Degree and Pat, to kind of walk us through WIOA, Wagner Pfizer, and Perkins 5, so that we have a better idea of how this all operates within the state. I just want to remind everyone that the purpose of the task force is to figure out governance. It's not to delve too into the policy, but I think we need to understand what's going on, how it all functions. But I know it's real easy for me to start diving into policy, and I'm sure it is for everyone else. I just ask everyone to keep that in the back of their mind and just try to hold that. The policy will be developed, I think, once we figure out the governance, who will be leading workforce in the state, letting them figure out what's going on as far as policy-wise, bringing those to the legislature for changes that may need to be made within the policy realm. So with that, Sarah.
All right. It's 8:45. you've got a couple of people in this chunks. When is a good time to shoot for transitioning? Away from me, like how much, half an hour, kind of go with it?
Whatever it's gonna take,
All right.
I think.
Yeah,
We've got a lot of time.
we have till
built in.
12:30 if
Okay.
If, you know,
we need it.
if we need it.
Okay.
I don't know that we're gonna need all of it, but I
And just, Mike, before we dive into, kind of the weeds of no, we're not going into the
We're
weeds
not,
of weeds.
yeah, we won't go into the weeds.
Could we just, I know we've had a lot of emails about the RFP. The RFP is now out. It's gone live, is that right?
That's correct.
So I just want to begin with an update on the RFP. for-
that will be that's the next piece on.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were,
Kendall will be.
oh, there she is. Okay, got it.
Will be letting us know where the RFP is and walk us through it, so it's, the public understands it.
Thank you. I hadn't gotten beyond the really long number 4.
So just to orient you to what I think what we're gonna talk about and what materials you have here. My goal today is David Hall gave us the 100,000-foot view. Like Mike and I discussed, I don't think we even want to get to the 10,000-foot view, but I think there's sort of 4 main buckets, and I'm prepared to do 4 sort of set conversations where I took notes from our conversation before, and we discussed, here's where we go down to like maybe 50 or 30,000 foot. And the 4 buckets are in your, I prepared a PowerPoint so that you don't have to be stuck reading, but
When
the
we're ready.
synopsis, yeah, the synopsis of what I'm gonna kind of go through is in tab number 5. So it should. That was first, right?
Just getting to 5.
You don't have 5, it should be 4.
It says one-stop American
Yes.
job center system.
Yeah, they may be a little different order, but that's the one I'm
Yeah,
gonna
what?
start with.
Yep.
It's the one stop. And if you don't have it, let me know because I think I have a couple little, you should have 4. You have an extra. And here, you can have my copy, because I have it on my computer. So it's American Job Center, single versus multiple, workforce development areas, federal state plan, and then federal funding. And I have a couple extra copies of the federal state plan and the single workforce development area. So if you don't have all 4 in your packet,
We have 2 pages in number 5.
So here's your other 2. You should have 4. 4.
Or
Okay.
4 things.
Yep,
We have 1.
you have, so you may have the weird one where we messed up.
Why are we surprised?
Okay, so what I am hoping to do is you'll see through this PowerPoint is I'm hoping just to hit the 4 topics that I think you really need to have at least a working understanding of, so that when you start looking at the structure and the planning, good morning, Ellen. When you look at the structure and the planning, you're looking for opportunities to build on what's required. So I want to highlight opportunities that I see in the federal structure and some restrictions. I regret that usually we look at WIOA as so restrictive, but the one-stop system and the state planning requirements can be, what I hope you will walk away from today is you will see that there is an opportunity to not completely reject the federal structure, but to add to it and redesign our governance system to get what you all may feel we need out of our workforce alignment. So I'm going to start with these 4 topics. Yes, please.
Is there an option to walk away from the structure?
So the one thing I asked Mike that I feel uncomfortable opining on is there's a whole section in here, and you can review if you like. I think it's in the big thick section number 3. And it says state board and waivers. So there are things that you can waive and things that you can't waive. I would rather that we talk with someone that isn't so interested in how the structure looks, because I think you can't walk away from some things and we can walk away from other things. But they're pretty limited.
Safe to say you're not going to get away from having a board.
Exactly. Yeah, it's safe to say we're not gonna get,
Requirements. of the board.
yes, but there may be some flexibility in the structure of the board, in the structure of the planning, responsibilities of the one-stop system, as we'll talk about. But like having a one-stop operator or having a procurement process are things that are strangely not waivable, not, you know, like we can't get waivers
I would
for.
just say anecdotally, and maybe Bell would add to this, we have found USDOL to become inflexible and intractable, just generally on everything. So, great, so there might be waivers, but we find that they have not been an easy federal partner when we are looking to do either innovative or
Right.
creative things.
Right.
That's what I remember in the past. Sort of.
But my view is that the consultant can help us look at other states and where they have been successful in some adjustments. We're just back, Cameron and I, the commissioner and others are back from a National Association of State Workforce Agency conference in Chicago, where Michigan, in one of their panels that I found very interesting, was able to waive some of the requirements for their state workforce board. And they have a giant agency where like Commerce and DOL and Commissioner, feel free to correct me if I'm misrepresenting what we heard, but a giant agency, and they were able, in passing comment, to note that they've gotten a waiver for some elements of their board functioning. I don't know the details of those, but I'm gonna say that's a consultant duty to come back and say, what is that? Does it work for us? Is it relevant? So with that, the first one I'd like to start with, this can be rather dense, but I'd like to start with making sure we walk away from the next 20 minutes with you having a working understanding of what the one-stop American Jobs Center system, and it's commonly referred to as the one-stop system or the one-stop network, what it is, what it at a baseline requires, and through some of this like Q&A, because I'm going to have you do a little engagement, so I'm not speaking at you this entire time. Through this, what I'm hoping you'll see is where there may be opportunities, and you'll be sort of your antenna will be up to say, if we have to have a network or a system that is supposed to be integrated, where can we make the system work for us and Vermontize it? So my thought here is I'm going to run through the key issues I want you to kind of listen for as we go through the 10 Q&As that are in your handout that I've, posed a question that you might ask and then put the answer in there. So you'll see the way that handout is structured is it starts with a question and then there's an answer. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things. As we're going through this, the key issues that I want to resonate with you are that an integrated system is already mandated. Whether or not it exists is, I feel like, a question that we could get really into the weeds with today. Because how the system works, I think, is part of our bigger discussion over time. But you can see from the face of the law, an integrated system is mandated, that it is we're mandated to have a physical system, which means in person. Just been a struggle for us as we're moving out of, we were in COVID, we're moving out of COVID. What is the right way to meet customers? There are physical requirements and virtual allowances. So we won't go way into that, but I want you to be aware that a system is both physical and virtual, that there are rules and a state MOU that governs how that integrated system looks. We've just re-executed our MOU. It's in tab 2, the state one that became effective July 1. And it outlines how this integrated system works with all of our partners. I want you to be aware that the one-stop operator is a required partner. And I'll dive into who it has been in the past, how we're interpreting that. If Abby wants to opine, or if Adam, you have any comments on the current system, like we have to go and contract the state board has to procure a new one-stop operator. We're in the process of helping them to do that. That's a work in progress, but just so you're aware, the one-stop operator has some duties and there's a lot of flexibility there with what that looks like and how that might intersect with our governance decisions. I want you to be aware that the State Workforce Development Board has quality oversight responsibility. Again, I think it isn't going to be a good use of our time as to say whether or not they've done it well or they're set up to do it well, but knowing that they have a statutory responsibility and that they're a party to the design of the MOU is an important thing to think about. I'll spend a little bit more, I won't go through all of the integrated system requirements, but one that I think is really worth this committee knowing about is the business services part, because we've all, through the last 3 or 4 years, talked about how employers need a one-stop shop. And the federal construct does contemplate bringing in economic development programs and partnerships to try to have a one-stop shop house for business services in this one-stop design. We're not there yet, but there's the beginning tendrils of a network there. And then clearly you need to understand how the funding works, or doesn't exist, but how the funding structures work together to create that network. All right. So the way I was thinking of going through this, part of the conversation is I have 10 questions that your handout has identified. Cameron, I only brought 5 copies of these. I know Ellen doesn't have them, and I'm assuming maybe other folks on Teams don't have them. They were the ones I emailed last night. I don't know if it's worth uploading that to team or emailing them, so at least Ellen has a copy. So I should have brought more paper copies. I apologize.
I think it would be good if Abby has it, if she could post it.
Okay.
Sarah,
Yep.
if it's all the materials that you sent me the other night, I can
Last-
forward them to folks.
So there's yes, you can forward the materials that were sent to, that are in our packets, but last night around 5:30, I said, here are the 4 handouts and the PowerPoint. So if you want to forward those ones.
Will your PowerPoint be posted?
Sure, yeah.
Oh,
Can I
great.
ask a
Yeah.
stupid question?
Yeah.
How do we access the team site? I don't think I
I
can.
forward you the invite.
Yeah,
to use
right.
it. Which I thought I did.
But we have a website. You could just go to the website.
Okay, all right,
It
okay,
doesn't need to be through Teams.
okay, good.
It's
posted anyway.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, don't we have looks like a committee website? Don't we have that where everything's posted?
Agency of Administration.
Yeah, it's,
We have a place there, but I don't know if we have actually have the ability to post anything.
I think that's an Abby.
that's an Abby question.
What was the
Abby,
question?
on your Agency of Administration website for this committee,
Yes.
you have an ability to post all these things, right?
Yes, we can post all the documents that were used today.
Okay, yeah, I think that's what we'd like to see. That'd be great. Thank you.
Including Sarah's
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
so she- yeah, so
Otherwise, I'm
she'll
just
put-
taking notes, right?
Yeah, that's fine. So here's what I'm hoping we can do, so it's not just me talking, it's if maybe Allison, you can start and you can say, the One Stop American Job Center system, what is it? And then we can just kind of talk through a few of these things. I don't want to read this to you, but I want to highlight a couple of the things that I think are important, the key words that you should know about.
That's a test.
Yeah.
All the questions, and I thought. you
Yeah.
could go around and do this.
So if you just want to, we'll just kind of go around and you can ask, what
Okay.
is it?
Well, and also I think a lot of us have different notions of what it is
Yes,
ideally meant to be,
exactly. Yep.
so I don't know when we want to talk about that. because
Yeah, so if
that-
you ask the question, I'll say, here's what the.
Okay, I'm asking the question.
Yeah,
So, One Stop American Job Center system, what is it?
okay.
And are we gonna go to you for that
Yeah.
answer and then we can?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then we can, if you need to verbally like talk and think it through, or if you're a reader, I can say, here's where the regulation set gives you more information. So what I will tell you is it is a federally required network. That's an important concept, especially as we get through the next piece. It's a network of separately funded, federally funded service providers. And it brings together both workforce development, education, and other human resource services. So an example, some Perkins, adult CTE funding, adult education funding, that's sort of the educational piece. Human resources is SNAP, TANF, some other, HHS partners. And this is the key word that I think, on paper it looks nice, seamless, customer-focused service delivery network. So again, network, which means that we get to decide a lot about how that network looks, and whether or not it really is integrated is for legislators, policymakers, the board, partners themselves to say like, integrated on paper, not so integrated. One-stop partners administer the programs. There's not a single source that, like, I can't tell the TANF folks or the REACH-UP folks how to do their employment and training program to align. The only place where I or any other partner can support how well they're integrated is through that MOU system. Yeah.
So on the federal level, is there anybody within the federal government, right, where you're saying you can't tell human services how to run their TANF or SNAP programs, that is somehow doing what we're trying to accomplish today through this framework of the One Stop American Job Center within a federal administration that's looking at how all those different pieces and their separate agencies align or don't align, because we can be creatures of them, right? So if they're siloed, then we are siloed.
Yes.
So is there any, how does
that work at the
Yeah.
federal level?
Yeah.
So we all have our federal agencies that we report to, including corrections, and we'll get to that with you'll see right here with the programs. The answer in my experience has been, it's pretty disorganized. So when we try to compel partners to the table to say, hey, you're required by this law to come here and you're required to help fund it, which we'll get to at the end. They say, what the heck? The community action agencies, CVOEO, BROC, those organizations, they're like, we are not contributing to your system. And we're like, you kind of have to be. And I go to my federal partner and say, can you call your friend over at HHS and their program officer and show them where they're required to do this?
Right.
And it's like, oh, we convene a couple times a year. It's still in the early years of implementing WIOA. We haven't quite gotten there. So the places where it is stronger than usual is the Agency of Education, federal Education, Department of Education is pretty in tune to WIOA. So you'll see Title II, HHS in terms of book rehab, they're pretty in tune. They help corral sort of the way their funding structure works. And then the other one I would say is the SNAP, not so much the TANF these days, but the SNAP. So that's the 3 squares.
And I'd say that is pretty representative in our state landscape as well, in terms of who tends to be like more tuned into the workforce conversations and interactive.
But that's leaving out whole chunks of the Agency of Human Services.
Oh, absolutely. Like childcare isn't there. CCD.
Or corrections.
Corrections actually is, but it's only do you want to move to the partners?
No,
Okay.
I'd like to ask.
Yeah.
Right now, before we get there.
Yes.
Of these one-stops, how many are actually functioning now in Vermont?
So that's a very good question. Okay, so what is required of the one stop is that you have one comprehensive center, one physical center where all the programs and their services are represented.
One per state, one per district?
One per region. So another part of our conversation today will be the difference between multiple regions and a single region. Vermont is a single region state. Federally. We have opted in, and I'll show you where we could change that decision, although I will also say I think it's a bad idea. But we are a one region state, and what is required is that we have one physical center. We can have affiliate centers and other satellite service providers. Each of those come with a variety of oversight responsibilities. So right now we have 6 affiliate sites. These are like hub offices and a number of places where satellite services are provided. But in order to be a one-stop, you have to have all of the partner services provided there. And not everybody here, like Job Corps in Vergennes, right? Job Corps isn't reaching into Springfield. They don't have a case manager over in Springfield. Youth Build isn't reaching down into Bennington. And so what we have done in our MOU is we said, all right, everyone has to provide services through this comprehensive one-stop physically, which is on paper, but as a network that the one-stop operator coordinates, we virtually make all of the federally funded programs available through any of the other affiliate sites or through our delivery of services anyway. So Vermont has one comprehensive physical center and at least 6 affiliate centers on paper. And those are where VL offices are.
And again, this is maybe where people's expectations are divorced from reality.
Exactly.
So the expectation that in Hartford, you will be able to walk into a
Right.
one-stop and have all of this, all these resources available to you
Right.
for counseling and advice and counsel and direction. They may or may not, that may or may not
Correct.
exist.
And that's what a decision that the state board can weigh in on as part of the MOU process and as partners. There are requirements with WIA. When WIA existed, this was 2015.
What's WIA?
WIA is the Workforce Investment Act.
Yeah. Without the opportunities.
Without the opportunities. It also required a similar one-stop system. In that network, Wagner Pizer Services, which are the Department of Labor's, we owe a Title III. Those are basic career services. Those were allowed to be standalone service providers. So that's exactly what did happen and still exists because we haven't shifted in White River Junction. You can come in, we have a Wagner Pizer service center there. When the feds come and they're like, you're not allowed to have it standalone. You have to have some other Title I programs, the VETS program. You have to have more, you have to have 4 in order for it to be an affiliate center. Otherwise, you can't call yourself a one-stop center. So there is, this is where we're sort of getting into like the oversight. It's important for you to know, that happens, but it's the difference between what actually exists on the ground to meet Vermonters' needs and what the federal system says, we either count it as compliant or we don't count it. So we have it there, but it's not 100% integrated in because there aren't all the other services that are there also.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, when I was commissioner, Burlington was the only official one-stop
Yes.
in the state.
I think it still
It
is.
still is.
It is, yeah. But now they've redefined that you can have affiliate sites and you have to have at least 4 other places. Affiliate sites also come with oversight compliance, which we'll get to, and the board has not come to check out any of our affiliate sites, but we haven't asked them yet.
I've been to one of them.
But officially is like compliance.
We could have a field trip. We could have a field trip to the boards.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I might be jumping the gun
Yeah.
a little bit here, but can these sites be mobile? Like to the extent it may not make sense in
Yes.
Vermont for us to have a full 5-day week, although it'd be wonderful. I don't want it to be like in Hartford site, like could we have like a van with like the 4 different employees that administer these programs who like are mobilely delivering these services to different towns and regions
Yes.
on a set schedule?
Yes, you can. And so the way that you would do that is we would articulate that in our MOU and say, we are going to do some of our services virtually. Here's where we're meeting people. Because even though we have that comprehensive one-stop in Burlington, theoretically, that is supposed to meet the needs of all Vermonters. And we know that's not going to meet anyone's needs, particularly pre-COVID, where people access their services much more in person. I think there's opportunity, some of the partners, we've talked about this, there's a lot of opportunity to restructure how this looks ourselves with some guidance to say, we want to make sure that you have virtual services and that you're all integrated into a one-stop kiosk. So that and a mobile van with rotating services could be perfect. Individually, we have conversations like that a lot. So I just met with DCF and we talked about how maybe next spring or next summer, a few of the one-stop partners might be able to put together a pilot where we would go to some of the transitional housing sites. And we would just kind of go and say, we're all here, but we're not going to bring all 18 partners because that's like chaotic. But a couple of the like SNAP, TANF, bulk rehab, VDOL, mental health, cool. Can we do that? Can we go to people's sites? And in our next MOU, we would probably write that in and say, that's how we're serving people.
A great example of how this isn't functioning or working is, I think, witnessed through the refugee relocation process. So, we have 120 new residents, all of whom are going to access all of these programs. But there is zero coordination. There's no knowledge how to bring all these people together to make it a seamless entry for someone, for anyone, let alone someone who's English challenged. And, there's no, we literally have to find people, bring them in and say, what services do you have? Oh my goodness, you have that service? They didn't know that. They just spent money on this. They could have had it. So it really is not functional.
I think that what Adam's talking about, it also goes to the divide between people's expectations and hopes that they could get to go one place, whether it's virtual or real, but I think people love real in many ways.
Yeah.
And get who you are, assess what your, skills, and help direct you. If you want this kind of job, or if you're at this place in your life, we might recommend X, Y, or Z. Here are the training programs available to you. Here are the state services that are available to you. It is that integrated, looking at a person as a whole person with lots of different needs and coordinating all those needs in one place. Our constituents would be ecstatic.
I think it's an ombudsman almost in each region. Maybe it's not someone from every single one.
Well, that's sort of what, that's what we're here for. So that's why I think actually this is at the core of where where constituents are frustrated that we're not able yet to really deliver this. And it is regional. I mean, I think a mobile thing is great, but I'd love to get our regional centers set and staffed, because people are arriving in their clothes or and so I think this is a big piece of our challenges before we even get away from this. What is it? Where is it?
So remember, my goal here is to say, here's where the opportunities are.
Right.
Not what we can change today.
Right.
So the one thing I wanted to point out is in your system, Adam, if we were, or in your problem coming to a better, maybe a better, different governance structure, the board could say, we've identified this need. We need to have a place where all refugees have their specific needs met through the American Job Center system. One-stop operator, go do it. Or committee of the board, go work with the partners, coordinate and make it happen. There's a provision in the federal regulation that allows for specialized service centers. Michigan, again, has an example of where they've actually started to do that. And our consultant could possibly come back, and I just wrote refugee because we may want to ask our consultant specifically to say, show us some models with some of these special populations where we could stand up a system like that and not have to create a whole different governance structure. We can do it under the federal law.
Commissioner Desmond.
Oh, how do you see that?
You can't see it because you're sharing your screen, Sarah, so I gotta move your up.
That's all right. I figured somebody would see it eventually. I like where the conversation's going. I think one thing, I know we're talking more about what is required versus not required. And we'll eventually get to when we're talking about current operations. I mean, I appreciate the idea that we would like to have this one stop where everybody can go and get whatever service they need. The biggest challenge we're facing right now as a department is that the amount of foot traffic that actually comes in, there's this belief that there's all these people out there that are looking for these services, and the reality on the ground is that there aren't. Our foot traffic in our one-stop centers, whether the federally recognized one-stop or the affiliate centers, has diminished to, like 1 or 2 people a day. And so to staff a center with staff and have them keep it open all day, I think that's where we're having, to Kendall's point and to what Sarah was alluding to, we've already started talking about how do we go out into the communities? How do we meet people where they are? Do we need mobile units that can provide resources within the community? But there just aren't a lot of people out there looking for workforce services with the record low numbers of unemployment. There's just an oasis out there, a desert, if you will, of trying to find. That's our biggest struggle with our staff right now, is that their MO before the pandemic was to be in the centers, receiving clients and using those clients to fill their roles in terms of enrollment into programs. And we've now needed to completely strategy to go out there and recruit clients into our programs because the foot traffic coming into these centers is so diminished.
Michael, I just push back a little on that. I have heard from constituents that they arrive and they're closed. So, or they have very limited hours. I have the feeling that if you either had a really great virtual one-stop with a real person who would go on a Zoom meeting with you and go through the same thing. But if we had regional offices that were open consistently, marketed the bejesus out of them, and I think you'd find something different. I've heard people being very discouraged by
I'd have to completely disagree with that analysis. That's not what we're seeing on the ground. One, we're having a hard time staffing our centers full time. And certainly I understand that there are times when people would go to a center and it may be closed, or maybe by appointment only. But we're seeing this nationally across the board as well, that the foot traffic that was there before is not enough to sustain, multiple staff people sitting in a job center, which we are doing, and we're seeing our foot traffic at minuscule levels in terms of being able to find the clients and constituents we need to enroll them in these programs. So what I understand that you may have a constituent or two that are experiencing that, and I'm not debating that at all. I'm sure it does happen on occasion, but it's the exception. It's not the rule. It's not what we're seeing on the day-to-day basis.
Right. Well, this is a huge discussion because, obviously if we also designed a virtual one-stop where a real person could meet you and not just you go and do all this stuff and do self-analysis, because it involves a certain amount of being assessed.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think this is a big discussion.
I would also say that what we're hearing from our federal partners and others, and Sarah can dig more into this, is that the number of one-stops we have in Vermont is excessive compared to what other states have. So the fact that we operate 12 regional offices for a state our size is excessive compared to other states. And so I think also needing to figure out how do we operate the right, whatever that number is, the right number of job centers.
So, yeah, Mike is right. There were 12. When we recently submitted our plan, technically only 6 plus the comprehensive meet the definition of an affiliate center.
Right, that's what I thought.
So the question isn't how many centers do we need to have, it's how do we make the one-stop network provide services to everybody? And if we stop thinking about place and start thinking of, because you look at all the partners and we start thinking about where can those services come where people already go, I think that's the mindset. And I don't think, unless you want to bring us in this direction, that it's our job to figure out what the structure should look like, but it's our job to figure out the governance structure that will make sure it's responsive to all of this and making those changes.
So the data piece, I think we should really flag as an important piece to understand who is looking, who historically have been looking. Were they, how many of those were repeat customers who were
Who
just
are
sort
our
of.
clients?
Yeah,
Who
exactly. Who is
are the
this?
clients
Yeah.
and how do we meet them where they
Yeah,
are?
and we've talked about this a lot in the
Yeah.
past, and I think for us in our region, we have done more with WIOA in the last 6 months than we've done in the previous 6 years. And it was through the refugee bill. What we've learned as a region are the tools which WIOA can help address. And there are people that are likely not the frequent flyers
Yeah.
in the system that WIOA could be applied to benefit, and they just don't, they're not in the system, so they're not getting that benefit. I think we can focus some governance to get those.
Absolutely. I know Dustin had, sorry.
Christ, you can see that.
Dustin had his hand up also. I know you couldn't see it, but I saw it when I.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reiterate what Mike was saying, many of the strategies that we put forward pre-pandemic were in support of the concept that we weren't getting foot traffic, right? I remember Sarah and I having a conversation originally about, I mean, it's probably 5.5 years ago at this point, Sarah, about the concept of labor and location and piloting in Middlebury, because the lack of foot traffic and the need to go out and meet people where they are isn't a COVID problem, right? This is something that we're experiencing well before the pandemic.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, and libraries, recovery centers, right? Trying to find those low propensity customers that to fill those needs, because we weren't getting the foot traffic even then. And I think the pandemic has just exacerbated that. And certainly the pandemic has made it harder for us to staff those centers as far as our own workforce and people willing to go in and work in situations where they're very, up close in front with the public. But the traffic was not, I don't feel, Sarah, and you can disagree with me, but was not a pandemic issue. That was happening well before COVID and having to go out and find people for the services that we were offering.
We don't need to get into a demographics discussion, but I'm not surprised, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes.
Not a member of the committee, so I'm trying to be careful when I chime in on what I say, et cetera, but I agree, Senator, I think it's a big discussion, and if you're circling it all the way back around to governance, it's also a discussion that the board really can be the one deep diving into these conversations.
And we need to figure out how to govern that so that the board can do that. And so I'm going to scroll a little bit past the partners just to kind of move us along. You guys have this on your paper. There's 18 federally required partners. You can see the diversity in them. I'll note, just because we're going to come back to it in a different section, that there are 6 core programs that really drive the federal planning process. And those are the first 3, adult, youth, and dislocated worker from the Department of Labor. Title II under AOE, which is the adult education and family literacy programs. And Title III, which is Wagner Pizer, also Department of Labor. Those are basic career services. That's career counseling, help with resumes, stuff like that. And number 4, the vocational rehab programs that are co-administered by Hireability and the Division for Blind and Visually Impaired. That's, yeah.
What is the federal definition of a dislocated worker? How long do you have to be out of searching for work to be considered a dislocated worker under WIOA Title I?
You can look, I'll search it up real quick, but I can tell you it is in section 3. It's in the adult section, which I think is 680.
I'm sorry, I can look it up.
Yeah, so it's in 680 and it said there's a definition of dislocated worker.
Yes, sir. At the end of the day, it can be right after a job loss. They don't have to be.
Yeah. Or notice, put on notice that they're losing their job. It can also be certain farm workers, like farmers who are like, I'm gonna get rid of my farm, but I've just worked for myself for a number of years. So there's a carve out for farmers and homemakers. So particularly parents who've been out of the workforce for a number of years, they're also considered dislocated workers when it's time for them to re-enter. So they are eligible for some funding too.
And youth is presumably 17 and under?
No, youth is so there's a 14 to 16 category that's very small, only 5% of our funds can be spent on that. But the 16 to 24, so once you turn 25, there's a big opportunity there with youth between 18 and 25,
Yeah,
which is where we've tried to focus the most on. So I'm going to scan past this. One thing that you should know, TANF, our Reach Up program, I think Shumlin was still governor at the time when some things had to be decided in 2016. And states could opt out of making TANF and Reach Up a required partner. We opted in and said Reach Up should be a partner. And so that's stood. And then for the sake of some consistency, ICANN, which is the Individual Career Advancement Network, is the name of the program from 3 Squares, where 3 Squares and VDOL and Voc Rehab work together, or hireability work together. So even though 3 Squares isn't a required partner, we bring them into our one-stop network for all sorts of really good reasons. Okay, I'm going to move down a little bit more so you have a little bit of a deeper understanding of the delivery system and the oversight. Right here, does someone want to ask me this question?
Adam's turn.
Sarah, who's responsible for creating and maintaining the one-stop delivery system?
So, Adam, you'll be interested to know that the responsibilities are assigned to the governor, the State Workforce Development Board, one-stop partners directly through their program funding, especially those 6 programs I just mentioned. And in this case, the Department of Labor on behalf of the governor. The reason I inserted this question, because it's so important, is that I think one of the core challenges that this committee was shaped out of is that there isn't a single leader.
Right.
And so I don't want you to be blinded to the fact that even though the one-stop system, which I do believe if we work within the federal construct, we can come a long way to becoming more aligned if we better resource and restructure the board and better understand how the one-stop operator can play a sort of disinterested role. But there still are some federal things here about who decides regions, money, whether or not the system meets the mark. So for example, the State Workforce Development Board gets to look at that one-stop delivery system and say, is it meeting the needs of people in Hartford? Is it meeting the needs of refugees? Have we included childcare resources? If not, we're directing the one-stop operator and the program partners to go and fix it. We'll come back and say, with what resources? And then we'll all jointly say, we'll go to the administration and legislation in the legislator to fix a particular problem. But the State Workforce Development Board has that authority and that position in the federal system. The governor plays the role of the backstop and sort of selecting some of the key roles that the one-stop partners play, like where the agencies are located. So I just wanted to throw that out there so that you aren't caught by surprise to say the federal system isn't perfect. And if we decide that we want to embrace the opportunity, there still are going to be some challenges. And that's more at the 10,000 foot level than I came with today.
But I think that the reason why we're here and the question I think that's
Yeah.
been asked is, so the State Workforce Development Board can do that, but who coordinates what the State Workforce Development Board says needs to be done?
Yeah,
Who is there? And I think that's where the thought is someone under the governor would then take that
Yeah.
job on and go to, here's where we need to make sure that all of these all of these things are working together in,
Yeah.
say, Bennington County or, whatever regions that we're looking at. So I think,
Yeah.
that's,
and with all our non-state partners, because the state workforce, intrinsically, that's a little silent. And our workforce system is bigger than that.
Right.
And that is, so it's not just coordinating
well, and you're coordinating, we're talking
Coordinating
about
the whole
coordinating state
thing.
programs and
Yeah.
federal programs, but how do we coordinate with what other outside entities are doing?
YCC or something.
Right, that,
Exactly.
or you have apprenticeship programs.
Vermont
Or
Roundtable.
internship programs that are being run outside the state.
Yeah.
How do we coordinate that all together to create this?
Yeah. And that's where I would say, like, in an ideal system, if the State Workforce Development Board did have a different structure or set of resources, subject matter expertise, nimbleness to it, you could say, when Adam comes to testify in front of you, what are we doing here? And he will say, not because it happens now, but just like in the future, he might say, look, we addressed this in a series of meetings and this is what we decided. We're going to require, the governor is now going to require anyone who gets money for workforce development to be a required one-stop partner. They are going to have to go into that network. They're going to have to contribute to the infrastructure. They're going to have to share their resources, meaning their information. They're going to be part of a common referral system, a common intake system. So you could look and still use that system and say, Adam, how are we doing it? Goes to the governor. Governor, how are we going to do this? Are you going to put some pressure on how funds are distributed? Okay. We compel people to be part of the system. The reason I keep saying this is because this isn't going to go away. Like, even if we have a different governance structure, if you have, which is I think what we have right now, is we're struggling because we've got some state statutes and we've got some authority here where we're still kind of doing this. And then you convene people to the table and you're like, are we doing this like just to check a box, or are we doing this because this is the meaningful work? And in absence of that sort of central, I don't have to say that to you. That's why we're all here.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to skip down to.
So Sarah, you're saying anybody who might receive any funds from the department should be part of the One Stop, or their programs should be.
It could be.
Or independently funded. Or
Yeah.
funded not within that system.
Yeah, because I don't know that the governor could say to the chamber, you are now, a required one-stop partner, but.
Unless they're receiving state dollars.
Unless they're receiving state
They put in
dollars.
like a grant agreement saying.
Yeah,
as-
that you have to
yeah,
be part of it.
Responsible for.
I don't know that I would say, like, if we give, Cathedral Square in Burlington a $20,000 grant to do some upskilling, that they should be a one-stop partner.
Right, that's what I was gonna, like,
Yeah.
where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
And it might not be, maybe you're not a one-stop partner. but
Yeah.
Your program is
But you
featured
could
at
be-
the one stops as appropriate, or
Yes.
something like that.
Exactly.
that-
You could be a one-stop affiliate. I mean, you could be you're a resource, and the one-stop needs to know that you exist as a resource,
Right,
just like
right.
a coordinator. What the whole point of this is that somebody needs to coordinate all the resources that are there and available for us to be recommending to our Vermonters who are looking to get better educated, to upskill, want to come back into the workforce.
Yeah.
We need all those resources available and interpreted by somebody who knows, who understands it well enough to Kendall, who comes to say, I'm ready to come back into the workforce.
Right,
I have these skills, I have these interests, what do I do?
right.
And somebody then has all these resources that they can direct them to. If you need better education, this is where you go. If you need another certificate, this is where you get it.
Really what we're talking about is like a little cross-train, like a little SWAT team of state employees who are cross-trained.
Yes.
Right, or at least know enough to be dangerous about all the different programs. They may not be an expert in TANF, but they need to know enough about it
To
to
where to
to
send.
tell you what it is, how
Yeah.
it can help you, and if you want to be connected. But so it's, and there is a state, and I don't remember which state, that is doing this pilot where they're cross-training like a little tiger team of state employees to be able to, again, kind of.
Maryland, maybe? I think.
That's what it was,
Well,
but
yeah.
there's bargaining that cuts involved and
Yeah.
all the bureaucratic machination there. But I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really creating a buddy system or a case, I mean, I hate the term case manager because it sounds so bureaucratic. But it is, if you express interest,
Right.
you get someone who's gonna work with you.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, I'm gonna go here, but I probably should.
Oh, go for it.
You may not. I know with what we've proposed over the years with people who want to relocate to the state, having this like service where it's like, oh, you need childcare, we're gonna help you find childcare, we're gonna help you find housing, we're gonna help you find a job, if you need additional
Yeah.
assistance, we're gonna get you hooked up and.
BCC pilot.
Anyway,
It-
so it's been kind of about this model too in previous years.
And it could be delivered
Yep.
virtually, but with a real person.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you might not access it in walking up the stairs in Hartford, but you might access it with a real person at a meeting time who's gonna listen to you and take your needs and interests and figure out how they can best be applied.
Well, especially given that the expertise is gonna be decentralized. You know, you're gonna have some who are gonna know more about XYZ program than others.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna be sitting in White River or in
Yeah.
Burlington or in St. Johnsbury.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the world has become infinitely more used to virtual services at this
Yeah.
point, so.
Right, but virtual services with a real.
With a real
body.
individual,
And
not
I
just a
think that
recorded
is,
something.
that is what is different. I mean, because I think people quickly derail when it's their responsibility to sort of know what to click next. It is really incumbent upon us, I think, to be able to provide some of that direction with a thoughtful person who understands what resources are available.
But if
to
you
them.
have that leverage through the funding to insist upon this participation and notification at least. I mean, you know how hard it is to get somebody to put a VDOL logo on a freaking ad at this
Yes.
point, you know, when you're giving them a grant, you say, be sure to mark it VDOL, oh darn, forgot
Oh,
that,
forgot to
you know,
mention
so
you. We just gave
you've got to be able to say, hey, look, you need to get materials ready for staff to have at hand, we need to do a need to do a virtual briefing with staff and all our one-stops or affiliates on this. I mean, and then, and yes, I'm the resource you call when you have
Yep.
questions. I mean, I think that would. go
And it's
a long
not just
way.
VDOL too, like I think
Right.
like the American Job Center, one part I didn't put in here, they all have branding requirements, because what the federal government wants is they liken it to Target. You know you're at a Target because that has a big red dot and all the Targets look the same across the country. Pre-pandemic, they wanted one-stop American Job Centers to look the same way and to be the same thing. So any worker or any employer could go into any one comprehensive one-stop center and have the same expectation. That has really waned a lot in the last 6 years.
If we put a one-stop at Target.
Right, well, that'd be more effective, yeah, right.
So you've now transitioned really nicely into the other part I wanted to at least highlight for this, for the purposes of this. And so Kendall, if you don't mind asking me the next question.
Yeah, so Sarah, what are the business services provided through the one-stop delivery system?
So Kendall, you'll be interested to know that.
And right now, I think I'm talking about services, right? Not
Exactly, services to businesses. That one key difference between WIA and WIOA is that WIOA requires such a one-stop network and system. Serve this, these are their words, and it's reflected even in our state plan. They serve businesses and job seekers with equal energy. We've worked really hard at the Department of Labor, who didn't serve businesses so much because many cuts, we talked about this last session, and a lot of funding over the years. We stopped doing a lot of business services. We'll go into at a different time, I can tell you how much ground we've gained back in the last few years. But here's a place where I see some opportunity in our system. I omitted the whole, how does the one-stop system serve job seekers? Because that's weeds, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is what's really interesting. So there are three, if I'm not mistaken, there are three things that they must do. And this is basically like the box checking. And then I want to talk to you here about what they may also provide. Because as you think about your governance structure, the membership of the board, and the resources that you may need if you want to bring in some economic development coordination, you'll need to know that this also exists and how it plays out. So the first things that are required are labor exchange activities. That's what VDOL, Wagner, Pizer staff do. Labor exchange activities are posting jobs. An employer comes to me and says, I want to, can you help me refer some candidates? We put it on JobLink, we bring you to job fairs, we do a variety of employer services that are tracked and reported. And we can provide labor market information. On some occasions, a lot more when we had more specialized staff. And I think RDCs are playing an interesting, close role here, which is where I think there could be some synergy. Labor market information. Am I offering the right wage for people in this occupation in my area?
No.
Right?
Across the board.
Across the board, no, right? But can we at a one-stop center also, in addition to hosting jobs, have a more robust way of providing labor market information to new businesses who want to expand? Do you have the workforce available to you before you start this planning? Can we do more with our RDC partners who do have some other expertise on what are the new types of recruitment and retention methodologies that are working? So labor exchange activities, we have to establish networks. We can also provide customized business services, and we've done this for a couple of employers, screening and referral of qualified participants, customized services to employers. We did that Brattleboro Memorial Hospital as an example, or CVMC, of when we can help that employer by connecting them, even if it's state funded, with federal and state funded training programs. We can also help with writing and reviewing job descriptions. I'm saying this is like we can. I won't say that we actually do this or do it well and have that subject matter expertise. We're lacking a lot at the Department of Labor. This is what the one-stop system should be able to do.
And Indeed will do that for you for free.
And Indeed would do it for free.
Which
Now,
may be one of our resources. So we
Right?
can,
right? So like another thing, there's one here about creating job accommodations and using assistive technologies. So one way this plays out is in our Burlington One Stop. We've invested, we haven't completed the transition, but I'd say $15,000 to $20,000 on top of the line assistive technologies for people with varying abilities. What we would like to be able to do by next summer is to showcase this, have employers come in and say, this is what that stand-sit desk looks like for a person with a wheelchair. This is what the monitor and mouse and the other system look like with people with visual disabilities. Here's how you use it. Here's how you create a space. So in our comprehensive one-stop, we could have a business services center where businesses can come in and sort of try out, this is how you make your workspace more accommodating. That's just a simple example that I would use if the feds came and monitored and said, how are you doing this? I'd say, oh, this is how we're doing it. But it could take, the board and the one-stop system could look at each of these things and say, how can we do this better and who should be involved? So that's the what you should be doing. I'll get to the next.
So I think an area where we could really focus is, something we're trying to do is teach employers how to be employers of choice. So if we expand that to be much more than that. It's, how do you ensure that you have DI training? How is it throughout your company? How can you be looking to model your benefit package for both new employees and aging out employees so that both are attractive? Ways that keep and upskill people within that entity, I think could fit nicely.
Yeah.
I just ask Adam really quickly a follow-up on that. Of the folks that you're doing that with, how many of them have HR directors versus not?
It's the ones who don't have them that need the help the most.
Because as I've been listening to this very good explanation of the existing structure, the question that keeps popping for me, and maybe we get to this when Kendall talks about the consultant too, is have we done a comprehensive recent sort of strategic communications audience scaffolding like work to take a look at what are the actual profiles of the types of businesses in Vermont and how many of them have HR directors versus not, in what sectors, and thus what are their needs, right? And then also done an audience profile of the different types of Vermonters that may be looking for work, from folks with masters and PhDs all the way down to a GED, for instance, and really understand what are their needs, so that then we go back to the structure of the what is because of what's the regulation and say, how do we adapt to that reality on the ground because of our unique situation, but coming at it from, in essence, the customer lens and designing the system based on what we have to do to meet the needs of the customers from that angle. And so I'm just gonna put it on the table for right now, because I'm wondering if some of the consultant dollars beyond just the what we've been talking about, that whether there's an opportunity to also think about a professional who's really keyed into strategic communications. And I recently had some experience getting some exposure to this. I'm really intrigued by what the kind of lens that it can bring to thinking about these things. And so I just want to put it on the table for as we're continuing to talk to. I'll stop there.
And Thank you, Ellen, for bringing it up, because that was one of my questions, because I think the needs have changed and shifted significantly in the last 2 years, 6 months, I would argue. I mean, I know I get more calls from, how do I retain people? What should I be doing in order to, good question, I'm not an HR guru. But, so, I mean, I think that kind of a needs assessment and who's got HR, who doesn't, and who, even with HR, are struggling with some of these questions. But the other sort of, not to be provocative, that I want to ask here is, how much of this do we want to compete with the private sector? Because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that do this for fees. Now, mind you, yeah, they're swamped and small businesses can't afford them.
Yes.
So there does become some line, and or how much of this should we be talking to partners like Small Business Development Center and VMAC and others who are in-house with many of these firms already and could bring some of these skills. So I just put that out there. I think it's genius what you were talking about in terms of how to do accommodations, how to be ready.
Yeah.
And everything we've talked about. But I think also, where do we parse this out, given the limited resources that VDOL has?
Or anyone. So it's not just
anyone,
VDOT.
right. Yeah.
So that, what you just noted is also contemplated and not exercised by many states, but I would say this is another interesting point that we might ask our consultant to really dig into, is WIA did not allow, it sort of said, here are all the things you have to provide at no cost to your customers. WIOA says you may also provide other business services and you may charge a fee. So like, think about that, the Department of Labor or the Department of Economic Development charging a fee, or RDC's charging a fee because they're part of the system.
Lots of other.
There are, yes.
There are many state departments that charge fees
That
for
charge-
services.
Okay, so new to some of our world where it's always been free.
But you don't get a car registered without a fee.
Right. So I think there are other things that we could build into the system where it would be free for certain businesses and not free for others. That is a contemplated model in the federal system. Be interested to see where it's working out and where it's not. So I had here, services may be free or by fee. I just wanted to highlight that.
Sorry to keep jumping in.
Yeah.
Can we just pin that there may be opportunity in the public-private partnership to leverage the dollars even further by partnering with non-state entities?
Right, referring them out.
That are in a performance measure grant, that if they're not performing, kick to the curb, now you're in
Absolutely.
charge with us. If you're not doing it, in a way that gets more for the dollar and probably couldn't be done under limited state deployment, because if you're putting
Yeah.
someone there, you're sort of committed for a while, right? Whereas
Yeah.
if it's a performance, you can sort of move through that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that I think is the whole point of a coordinator of the system that is not embedded in the system. Which
So-
is why I think having a service provider be responsible for coordinating, it makes, didn't make sense. I would wish I.
So that is a great transition point to that last role that you're probably least familiar with. So the one-stop operator is a required partner of the one-stop system. It is an entity that coordinates service delivery. It is contracted by the State Workforce Development Board, and it is a place where we're out of compliance right now. When WIOA was first passed, the Department of Labor, in a competitive bid, this has to be competitive, although caveat could be sole source, the governor and the board could say, hey, we've created this little group, it's 5 employees of the State Workforce Development Board, it's part of state government. They're the ones that we're going to give this one-stop operator duty to. Nonetheless, under the federal structure, the one-stop operator is at a minimum the one who coordinates service delivery of the required one-stop partners and the service providers. So what you have here is a board who makes policy decisions and can make the determination about whether or not we need to have businesses involved and to what degree, who those required partners are, what needs to be offered and how the system needs to shift and the partners need to shift to meet certain needs. And then they've got a contract, or their direct employers, of the one-stop operator. And the one-stop operator says, my job, or is, like their job is to coordinate everything outlined in the MOU, because we did add some additional duties of the one-stop operator in this year's MOU that said this shouldn't be any one specific role of coordinating and integrating and convening. It should be the one-stop operator's role. So the one-stop operator is something I really want to make sure that you understand exists, because in terms of the who is going to do the work, there is already a required partner there. The funding doesn't exist. So that's why I will say, I think the Department of Labor was strategic 4 years ago when they said, we want to be the one-stop partner, because otherwise funding might be diverted. I think there's a space for some conversation here about what do we want the one-stop operator to do? And how is a coordinating role different than a service delivery role? So the one thing that one-stop operator can't do is they can't create the state plan. So the state board, that's their job to come, because it's sort of like, there's a little bit of a conflict there and saying, and to Ellen's point, like, have we looked at what the real needs are right now in the community, and are we matching it? Well, if I'm a service delivery provider, I might frequently say, yeah, we've looked at it. This is what we see, and this is how we want it to operate. So I'm going to write in the state plan. Having more robust partnerships here can help create the state board being in the role of saying, here's what we want the strategic initiatives to be. And because all of you who are one-stop partners are part of the state board and represented in some way, theoretically, you're going to say, that ain't going to work for us. But once that plan is made, you have a one-stop operator who's going to be implementing it at the coordinating level. So I just want you to know that that one-stop operator is there to be the cross-trained team, or to be the marketing team, or to be, do some of the outreach that isn't in the planning and policy development, but plays a role.
Yeah. So the operator is, could conceivably oversee all the one-stops, whether they're virtual
Absolutely.
or physical,
Yeah, all the network.
the whole network,
The
the
network.
one-stop network.
Exactly.
Maybe we should start thinking of it as a one-stop network.
Which
And,
consists of physical and virtual service delivery.
but all with real leadership, individual support leadership.
Yep. Their contract is with the board. It's not with anyone. It's not with us. It's not with the
So
governor. It's with the board.
Currently, our one-stop operator is,
The contract expired July 1 with the Department of Labor. And it was really, I would not look at the model that we've had for the last 4 years, mainly ineffective.
so that's a big in play.
Well, it also, if you scroll back up, I don't know if I need counsel here before I make these comments, but I think we're in violation of, not the letter of the law, but certainly the interplay between the operator and the designer.
Yeah.
Is all really, we're not staying true to bullet two.
For a different point of conversation that Abby and I and the commissioner, I'm sure Abby has had these conversations with you, have helped make sure that the board is positioned to be able to contract, where the Department of Labor is unlikely to be the one going after the contract this year. And their one-stop partners also, in knowing there's no real funding for the one-stop contractor as it exists now, just some minimal funding. The one-stop partners, when we created the MOU, kept that in mind and said, we don't have the ability ourselves to make this better, but this group could start to look at this and say, here are the governance, here are the changes that need to be made in order to allow for a robust.
So just when you get to no funding, I just want to make sure I'm I understand. So yeah, this would theoretically go out to bid and there's no money. Please come be our one-stop coordinator for free is essentially what we're asking people.
No, because we've identified weeds, but we've identified some WIOA funds that we could sort of put aside that aren't going to cause us to fire people or lay off anyone. So no fears about like anyone losing their job.
Yep.
But the State Workforce Development Board has a small appropriation that also can
But all of the agencies can be compelled to contribute.
Exactly.
So, I'm sorry, can I just, I want to make sure,
Infrastructure costs can pay for it.
can I ask one more question about one stop
Yeah,
or?
Yep.
So the one stop coordinator,
operator.
operator is responsible though for corralling all these partners on page one, correct?
Yes.
But are they in any way statutorily responsible for coordinating or wrangling like we've been talking about, programs not on this list?
No.
But could we ask them to?
Yes.
In a new, like if we wanted to work with, we're talking about like RDCs or
Yes.
School of Fund or other outside
Yes.
colleges partners, like could we say you are also responsible
Yes.
for?
Yes,
managing this
and
group?
you would do that, the feds would love that. What we would do is, these things are, I think at the end of the day, what the federal government wants is for us to say, yes, we thought about this, we planned it, and then we did it. So you would include that in the MOU, make an amendment to the MOU and say, we added these additional partners now
And the one-stop operator
in their
is
contract.
accountable to the board.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just trying to I'm working out the hierarchy, sorry, in my mind.
Yeah.
But 'cause I think it goes though to governance, so
Yes.
anyway, sorry, okay.
Yeah, so there's opportunity here with what that role of that one-stop operator is, who they report to.
Trying to
And
picture
how
how the Russian dolls goes out.
But it says that they can't convene stakeholders.
To assist in the development of the state plan.
State plan.
Yep, so when it comes time every 2 and 4
They've
years,
got to step away.
Adam can't tell them, go get those same group that you work together and doing, what he'll say is, I've got someone who's going to do the state plan. And we're going to convene around what it's going to look like, not what it does look like.
One of the things that I think may be helpful too, because it can be quite confusing and quite complex, and somewhat of a maze or tangle to navigate, would be if in talking with this consultant, we're looking to bring on, we should be looking at other states that are, we're very early in our book. And there are some other states that I think are probably many chapters ahead of us in terms of how their system is designed. And so if we can say, like, this may be what we want the system to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, then we can start talking about the changes, the incremental changes that need to be made over the next 5 to 10 years to get us there. But I think we have to know where we're trying to get to. And so, looking at either larger states or similar size states, multi-region states, single region states, to say which structure actually is best for Vermont. Because the one-stop operator, as we're trying to conceive it now, seems very, very complex in terms of how does it work in terms of interplay with other agencies and other partners. But there are other states that have figured out what that should look like. They're just way further down the road, right? So like, we're not going to get to where they are within a year or two, right? They've had to make some hard systematic changes to their operation, their funding models, their allocations to get there. And so we may want to be thinking, like, if we can have a consultant that helps us identify different models that we should consider, and then we identify what needs to happen over the next 5 years to get us there, that may be really helpful for this group and how we move forward.
It sounds like the USDOL is contemplating this one-stop operator to be funded by the state and not by the Fed, so that we have skin in the game as well,
Oh, yes,
right?
yes.
And so that there's more state control, that we can do more than what the Fed is requiring. if we have other state programs that we want to implement or be part of.
Other partners.
Exactly.
The reason that I would say, yes, that was a legislative intent, even though no state has done it, we asked if we could this year and they said yes. Because we're back to restriction, is all it says in statute is that the one-stop operator must coordinate the service delivery of required one-stop partners and service providers. In other places where they talk about duties throughout all those, that section 3, it's very prescriptive. We are required to have a one-stop operator. They know, and we have to have one for each region of the state, which is why I will also say when we get to multiple regions versus whatever, if we go anything other than a one region state, you'll have to have 2 one-stop operators and we're just adding more complexity. But here, all of the duties of what we mean by coordinating is articulated either in the MOU or in the board's RFP.
I think, Sarah, too, the other challenge that we have found ourselves in here is because we're so small, our funding is so limited. So there's also, I wouldn't say other states have more flexibility in how they spend their funds, but they just have more funds to play with, right? So like when you're looking at Massachusetts that has how many different regions? I mean, it's like 15 different regions. So they have 15 different workforce boards and 15 different operators. You know, like it just becomes very complex, but they have way more money to manage and deal with, where, you know, we can look at 10,000 or 20,000 or 100,000, and that's a big cost for a small state like us, where they're talking in the millions and tens of millions and probably hundreds of millions in some states.
So I've got one other section and then we're done with part 1. I know we're not going to get through all 4, but I'll ask your feeling is for.
There were 4 buckets that you had.
Yeah.
Chat about. This is bucket 1.
This is bucket 1. The other one I'd like to at least touch on, if you feel like you have time, is the federal planning requirements. Because the federal planning requirements also provide a lot of opportunity for us to.
But we're not going to ask your last question.
Yeah, if you want to ask these 2, I think we can just kind of tick them off so that you've heard them in if you learn by hearing things, you can hear it. So do you want to talk about the?
It's Mike's turn.
Sure, Sarah. So what are the one-stop infrastructure costs that need to be shared?
So the infrastructure costs, every single one of the one-stop partners, all 18 of them, when they sign the MOU, they also have to sign a very complicated infrastructure funding agreement. At the very least, they have to sign it. What we have to agree on is what's in it. The feds believed before WIA even that there were too many workforce systems that were located in different places across the country. They started through WIA and then into WIOA. WIOA now compels it. WIA encouraged it. They wanted people to begin to physically co-locate. And what they said is other programs, including not USDOL programs, now have to use a portion of their federal dollars to pay for non-personnel costs, including things like rent, utilities, maintenance, equipment, and technology. What we have done in our MOU that you would see is we've all set the bare minimum for our partner programs, knowing that TANF doesn't have a lot of extra money, like DOC, like nobody has money to actually have a physical presence in the one-stop. So we've really threaded the needle to say, if they're not actually in the building, can they just pay for a few square feet of the resource room so that if someone comes in, WIOA Title I or a Title III staff person would be able to give a good referral out to their program. So in a sense, their programs are accessible there. We've met the bare minimum of how we're making all of our services available and requiring the one-stop partners, except for the Native American programs, to share the costs. It is this structure. If the board decided or the group of partners decided, all right, now we're all in, we could fund the one-stop operator. You could fund 2 or 3 positions, who are your, well, what's the team called?
It's called the SWAT team.
A SWAT team, right? If you said you
Oh, that
want a
sounds
SWAT
so-
team.
Yeah, that sounds like go military.
So
Awesome.
this is really difficult. This is very difficult to negotiate. I did the first one and we asked Mary Brannigan as an independent consultant to come and help negotiate the second one just this past summer. But there's an interesting part of this. The one-stop infrastructure costs all have to be agreed to. However, it plays a really important role because he issues guidance and we have it as like the backstop on how the infrastructure costs will be shared if the partners can't come to agreement. And that guidance is pretty harsh to some of those smaller programs. We've helped advise specifically so that we could come to an agreement. So I just wanted you to know there are many TGLs, which are the equivalent of the federal guidance on how states are to do this. It is a point of a lot of concern across other states. You should know Vermont is doing it, but we're doing it at a very small, minimal level. And that it is set forth in the MOU. So it's not something you have to legislate. It's not something you have to do anything about, but it is a way that you can consider the sharing of costs. And if you were to try to legislate it, know that you would be creating a separate parallel level of complexity around sharing resources. And that is a potential opportunity to cause the commingling of different federal funding sources.
Also, just to jump in there,
Yeah.
say we're meeting the minimum basics of it, that means that VDOL is
Subsidizing.
carrying
A very
the burden
important
of those
point.
costs of keeping
Yeah.
these actual physical locations.
Yeah, so VDOL really is shouldering the entirety. We haven't, Abby now is going to be taking on the role. September 30 is the first quarter of the new MOU where this closes. Abby, and on behalf of the board, will participate in invoicing all the programs according to the costs that they agree to through the MOU. Our hope is that no program will ever have to pay through the totality of a year more than $1,000 into it. So that means that what we said is that VDOL will still keep all of our spaces open, we'll pay for the phones, we'll do all this. They'll just pay a very, very small share because it's what we agreed to. And I was saying for VDOL, for our programs, we said we've been paying this for years and years and years anyway. Let's build goodwill and keep trying to make this system work until we can do better.
So up to this point, we haven't been invoicing the other.
So
agencies.
during, the first MOU that we came into compliance with was in 2017. And I wasn't the director then, so I could play a role. I negotiated that and designed the first infrastructure funding agreement. What we never did is invoice anybody because on the VDOL side of administering it, it became on paper, it was an easy system to design and to look at. But when the accounting system that we use, when we sort of turned to our finance office and said, okay, how do we issue these invoices? Because you could only invoice for actual costs, it became more complex than we were able to administer. So we just said it was a wash, we cover it all and told the feds, they agreed to it. So they met the requirement is to agree to it, not to actually have to pay it, just to be liable for it. But now we've got Abby who's going to invoice them, I think twice a year or maybe once a quarter.
It feels like we've designed a system to not work. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
because if we can only
Yeah.
bill for actual costs
Yeah.
and we only have one stop just to meet the needs.
Yeah.
We have backed ourselves in a corner where we can't bill, so we can't actually implement. And so without some other funding source to change that.
Yeah. We think we can bill and Abby can, I know we worked with the partners and Abby and Tori worked with our fiscal office. I stepped aside, like arm's length from this because I was an interested party. But I think that they're going to be able to invoice this time, but it still will be just a very small
And
amount.
we're talking about these physical presences, which are already,
Right.
in my humble opinion, pretty challenged to start with. They are not being all things to all people.
Right.
Which, I mean, this is.
Go ahead. I was gonna jump in here. I mean, this is very, very difficult and challenging, and I'm gonna speak with my UI director hat on at this point. So UI is a required partner, and when we have extremely limited funding, I can't even run an effective UI program at this point. When you get into a conversation of breaking this up, potentially having multiple regions, multiple one-stops, you know, the infrastructure that we want to put in here, if that cost isn't starting to get passed on to some of these other programs, they can't bear it. And I can't even imagine some of these other smaller programs. So I'm 100% agreeing with you. And I think it really has to have a conversation about how you fund it.
Yeah.
Because the more you build it out, build deeper, you start to want to mandate these other programs start to paying more of a share. Some of them can't. You can't.
But-
Can't do it.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's exactly why having a better sense of audience and customers is key.
Yeah.
Because if we actually have the flexibility to design the system
Yeah,
to be really what we need it to be, we gotta start with who the customers are and understanding their profile.
If you are the Jobs for Veterans State Grant Program, for example, JVSG, that's one of the programs we run in the Department of Labor, but your program is a required partner. It only gets less than 500,000 a year, and we have 4.5 positions.
where is this?
This one is, I just used one of this isn't, I haven't showed you this one yet, but I just pulled up one of, it's the federal funding one.
Yeah.
It's how much in federal dollars each of these programs get.
And these are federal dollars, which may not be able to be used always for this. Is that right?
But they're required to
They're
use
required.
it.
So we're talking just federal funds right now.
And you're,
And I think your point is well taken, that the funding that we're seeing in your program, and I'm sure all the other programs are either stagnant or we're losing money from the Fed to
and
provide these programs, and yet they're telling us that
Exactly.
use that money to create this one-stop offering.
Well, and this must be new from labor, because this was, thank God.
This
they were
was,
around
this was,
in
came
my
into effect
day.
in 2017. It was
So, and I think it's complete disincentive to participate in the
Agreed.
one stop. And, you know, I'm not the commissioner, and I don't work for the state of Vermont, so I can say this.
Yeah.
The state has never put a nickel into the Vermont Department of Labor, not once. And that's partially why Fort Cameron has to deal with a 45-year-old computer system, and why we are not able to deliver all the services we want to deliver, because you just hit the nail on the head, Mike. The federal dollars are doing this. So if we want a robust assistance program for unemployed, new Americans, et cetera, I mean, I don't know how many other states don't have a nickel of state money. I mean, in my day, going to NASWA, et cetera, you're like, oh, we got this much in state money. And I'd be like, oh my God, how nice must that be? And I'm not talking millions, but you know, like your point, Cameron, why would you put money into this one? You know, like, fine, I'll just stay right here in my cubicle, or you're some of these other mandated partners. I mean, and say, yeah, even $1,000. Well, that's $1,000 less of services I can deliver to somebody else. And so, you know, I mean, I'm shocked it's a federal requirement. I think, you know, that's something we ought to be talking to our congressional district about. But on the second hand, it's like, okay, then what are we going to do to
Right.
support that
How
on
are
the
we-
state level?
Right,
How
exactly. How are
important
we
is
gonna
this
put our money
service
where our mouth
compared
is?
to,
Right.
excuse me, you know, historic barn preservation, Ellen, don't shoot me. Or, you know, any one of a number of places we spend money in the state, you know, it's.
Most of which are worthy, but maybe we need to put our money where our mouth is on this world.
If we want this to work.
Because there's been no value, so it's chicken and egg, right?
Right, and so how do you, back to Ellen's point, you know, who are our customers, what's the value they need, what can we bring? Where is our specialty versus somebody else that we could partner with? And bricks and mortar, I mean, Department of Labor's paid for most of this stuff already. I mean, at least the one stop in Burlington, I went through that joy, of looking at that, but I just, yeah, this just, it's like I'm sitting here listening to it, this is antithetical. And it's just.
This started, so again, I'm trying to point out to this, like, opportunities for, you know, who has this conversation? Who's the one we're deciding it? Because
Well,
it's
that's
not,
what we're
right?
going to, that's why we're here.
exactly. So here, I just want you to know, the one-stop AJC, the whole system, it is, we're meeting the letter of the law, but remember, we're just checking the box here. The state board has established some, they did because I wrote it years ago, objective criteria and procedures to assess the effectiveness, physical and program accessibility and continuous improvement of the one-stop AGC. They can also do the same thing for the one-stop system, for the one-stop network. They can build it into the one-stop operator contract. There is a structure right here through the board, if provided with the structure, the resources, the authority, recognized authority to be able to do its work. That is an opportunity that we could really look to as opposed to creating something different.
So we have a structure already that's built in. What we don't have is the board doesn't have the staffing it needs
Subject matter expertise.
to provide
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
To assist chair of the board and the board.
Yeah.
And we have Abby and that's it, right?
Yep.
So we really need to think about that as well. We need people that are serving the board with expertise as well.
Yeah.
Or we're not gonna get anywhere.
It can't be me. It can't and I only say me because I'm sitting here having done a little bit of this, but then my role at the Department of Labor is as the Director of Workforce Development, overseeing service delivery of programs. And I'm often in these tables just because of some knowledge that I have. I'm here today because of some knowledge that I have, but that's not it's not sustainable.
Well, you should be helping advise the board.
As well as
right?
Diane Delmas
Right.
and
Yeah.
Heather Boucher and
Right.
others. Yep. Okay.
You should really be focused on the programs that you're in this term. Ensuring that you're
Right.
running.
I mean, that's how the role should be, but because out of necessity, when the infrastructure funding agreement came up, the one-stop operator requirements, the previous commissioners made some decisions about all right, we don't have any other resource, we've got to hit compliance. So, yep, you're going to do this, this, and this. And at least on paper, those duties are assigned, but they're not. I think the role of this group is to say, what are the duties that the state board has? What resources do they have? And
So maybe for also topics, you can't ever charge those folks, if there just is no
Yep.
resource, and we find a different source to fund the system. We have to come up with a way to get those agencies and departments better engaged,
yep.
even if it's not the money.
Yes, because they
That's,
provide the
that's
resource.
where the challenge
And
is.
I'll say they want to be engaged. I know I regret that we can't do more together because of a whole, but Diane and Heather and Jessica Careless, they will pick up the phone and say, core partners, the 6 of us, we need to get together. Yeah, let's do it. We'll prioritize, but it's.
I completely agree with that. I think it's more at the grassroots level across the state where the challenge comes. The leadership has been there all along.
Yeah.
My experience, 100%.
Do you want to try to get to okay, so we have options. We have the federal state plan, we have multiple regions versus local regions, and we have how the federal funding works. All 3 of them are shorter than the one-stop operator. The one-stop operator was the most robust, which is why I wanted to start with it. I'm sorry, the one-stop system.
So does everybody want to take a short break and then we can get started?
Good idea.
Great idea.
I think it'll only take me 5 minutes
That's
to
fine.
walk through the RFP.
Take a little break.
Yeah. So what I'm just saying, for the budgeting time, I don't think it's gonna take too long to outline the RFP. Get it on the public record that everyone here has, the task force members have seen it. So to your, and I'm not sure what else, I'm sorry, that we have on the agenda.
That's
Chair.
it.
Okay,
That's
so-
why I said any public comment that anybody might have and then decide what we want to talk about. And schedule the next meeting. So why don't we take a
Why don't we
10
come
minute
back
break?
at 10:30?
Yeah, come back at 10:30. But Abby, I
Perfect.
think we can stop recording now and we'll come back at 10:30. If you can do that.
You got that, Abby? Got it, Mike, thanks.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
How are you holding up, Cameron? You should.
Well.